But he's so willing to make a whoopee.
I started playing trombone when I was in a junior in high school after failing in so many other different instruments like violin. My mother started me out on violin, and my violin teacher told her to save her money. Then I played drums a little bit. I played drums in the Boy Scout Drum and Bugle Corps and on into high school. But I wanted to play a horn. I really wanted to play a trumpet. And we had a brand new band director there at the high school, Summer High School of St. Louis, Missouri. And they was forming a beginner's band, and I had signed up to play trumpet, but they couldn't get anyone to sign up to play trombone, so I volunteered. I always liked this trombone, like when the circus bands would march through the streets and hear that the sound of, I like that noise, you know. So I volunteered to take up trombone and started off in high school. Marching band. I learned one march by rote. That is, they had to dictate the notes to me and tell me what position to play the notes in. So all my music had a bunch of numbers all written all over each note, like third position for this note, first position for this note, fourth position for that note, etc. And I was leaning on the other trombone players' talents, really, because I couldn't play nothing. I did learn the B-flat scale, but what to do with it, and it was it was funny when I think about it back in those days. Then when I returned to school after summer break, I found out I was the only trombone player in the band, so I didn't have nobody to lean on. So I had to get my act together, and then I really started taking the trombone seriously. And we had a high school jazz orchestra called the Sumner Swingsters, and so we'd got a lot of Count Basie stocks and arrangements and a few Benny Goodman things, and practiced them every day for about 3 or 4 months until we could learn how to play it. Remember, we were all in high school, and none of us really were extremely talented, I would say. And upon graduating from high school, I was kind of laid low for a while, and finally I was able to get a scholarship to attend Wilberforce University of Ohio to play with the Wilberforce Collegians Jazz Band. And that started me really to taking playing more seriously, because when I went to my brother and I, Ernie Wilkins, big brother, he was already offered a scholarship as a saxophonist, and they found out I played trombone and they needed a trombonist with us. So without any audition or anything, they recruited me to attend Wilberforce University to play with the jazz band. And believe me, man, the music was far more challenging than what I had been experiencing. And I was so bad, they were ready to send me back to St. Louis. But they had to keep me because they didn't have any other trombonists. So they bored with me for a while, woodshedding on occasions and really taking my music home and trying to learn it. But I finally started catching on, so that gave me more encouragement. And after 2 years of college, this is when World War II broke out, mind you. They were recruiting black musicians to join the Navy, offering them a rating of second-class musician without having, well, we did have to go through boot camp, but we were rated when we went in instead of starting from apprentice seaman. So a bunch of guys, including Clark Terry, who was living in St. Louis, and we volunteered to go in the Navy, to join the Navy band and play as a full-time musician. Of course, we had to play marches and classical music along with the jazz, and that was really what really got me my foot into really developing into a rounded musician, because the competition was strong, and you were on your horn every day, whether rehearsing or performing. And by playing a varied styles of music, as classical music and marches and whatever, you were able to get a more rounded experience. And for 3 years of doing that, if you had any talent at all, it would come out. And a lot of the musicians that had just finished high school had gone in the Navy and really got their education by playing in the Navy band. And many of them, after this tenure of duty, were qualified to play in any big name band that would need your talents. And so I felt that I was good enough to play with anybody by the time I was discharged from the Navy. Okay, so now I'm out of the Navy. I know all the band leaders are going to be knocking at my door. Come play with me, man. You know. But it really wasn't like that, because many other musicians all over the country, including those that had made names for themselves prior to the war, were getting their old gigs back. And at the same time, bands started breaking up, big bands. I spent most of my career as a big band musician. And so it wasn't, I thought, here I am. Here I am, world, I'm ready to conquer you, you know. So it was difficult. Actually, I found out it was difficult trying to get a gig, even in St. Louis. There were very few jobs, and occasionally you would pick up a dance job, like one night this week, maybe another night 2 weeks from now, or something like that. And so finally, our territory band, under the direction of Ernie Fields, came through St. Louis, and he needed a trombonist. One of the trombone players was leaving at the end of this particular gig, so I said, okay, man, I'll take your place, you know. So as soon as so the next night I was leaving St. Louis, packed up my bag, my suit, my one suit, and left on the bus for, I think our first stop was Toledo, Ohio. And we toured through the Midwest on into Washington, D.C., where we played a week at the Howard Theater. Then we went to Baltimore and played a week at the Royal Theater. Then we had a week off, and we went to New York and played the Apollo Theater. And then following that gig, we went on a southern tour along the East Coast, like through Virginia, North and South Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, on into Texas, where we opened up at a club in Dallas called the Rose Room for an indefinite stay. And that was nice. You know, the band wasn't the greatest band in the world, but it was decent, you know. And I was having fun, you know, out on the road, sitting up in the band playing music. That was my ambition. So after about 4 weeks in Dallas, I got a call to join a band in Chicago that my brother Ernie was working with. They were getting ready to leave the Rum Boogie in Chicago and go to New York and play the Savoy Ballroom for extended stays. So naturally, I wanted to go back to New York, because New York is where New York was New York. That's where everything happens. So I put in my notice, and Ernie didn't want to see me go. He offered me a raise. By the way, I was making about $50 a week. Of course, this is 1946, of course. So I left and go to Chicago to join Eddie Mallory's band in Chicago. And when their gig ended at the Rum Boogie, then we left for New York. And the band was an excellent band. In fact, it was more modern than the average band out on the road, outside of Billy Eckstein's band, of course. And we played the Savoy Ballroom, and it really went over great. And following our 4 or 5 weeks at the Savoy Ballroom, the contract ran out. So we had another week off, and we played the Apollo Theater for a week. And the band leader, Eddie Mallory, was such a playboy. He was a good pal of Joe Louis. In fact, Joe Louis invested in that band. But Eddie was out, was hanging out with Joe on the golf courses and wasn't taking care of business. And following the gig at the Apollo Theater, we didn't have nothing in sight. And I had a chance to join the Billy Eckstein band, but the band was so wild, you know. I was kind of scared to hang out with a wild bunch of dudes, because they were really out, you know. And so I stayed around New York. And eventually went back to St. Louis and worked with a local band there by the name of Jeter Pillars. It's 2 different dudes, James Jeter and Charles Pillars. They had a co-op band, and they had been on an extended USO tour, and they were back in the States and was supposedly had a whole list of gigs lined up, and so it sounded good. So I left New York to go back to St. Louis with them. Otherwise, I was going to stay in New York and work with Roy Eldridge's big band that he was putting together. But this sounded so enticing, because he's supposed to have had 3 or 4 months of steady work. Well, it didn't turn out that way. So after working here and there around St. Louis, of course we did get to the Apollo Theater for 1 week, but most of the work was at a ballroom in St. Louis called the Toontown. And then we worked the Riviera nightclub in St. Louis, but it was, you know, like, you do 2 weeks here, and you have 2 or 3 weeks off, and you do another week or 2 here, and 2 or 3 weeks off. So I got very impatient, and I decided I would go back to Wilberforce, and because they still kept a big band, swing band going, even during the war years. And I had stopped through there one time and sat in on one of the rehearsals, and I saw the great potential for the band, but there wasn't any leadership there. In other words, the band director was more or less the leader of the band. the school band director I'm talking about. And he really didn't have the experience to really bring out the jazz potential of this school band. So I took my GI Bill of Rights and went back to school and petition and you know, kind of more or less say, man, let me take the band so I can develop this band, because I figured I could do something with the band that he wasn't able to do. And reluctantly, he let me take over the band. That's when I got to be the leader of the Wilberforce Collegians. And the band really developed, and we had some great musicians in that band. Practically everybody in this college band were inexperienced, more so. And it was just a matter of welding them together and giving pointers on how to phrase, what not to do with certain passages, or how to interpret certain passages. And so it worked out. And the second year I was there, we won the College All-Star Band poll that sponsored by the Pittsburgh Courier. And we ended up doing an appearance at Carnegie Hall in New York and a one-night engagement at the Savoy Ballroom in New York. So that was the highlight of my college career. In 1948, 48, during the summer break, I went to St. Louis, of course, and stayed with my mother, and I went to one of the nightclubs, the Riviera nightclub in St. Louis, and Erskine Hawker's band was performing that week, and I ran into one of my major influences, a fellow trombonist that was playing with the band named Booty Wood, and he was surprised to see me. He said, "Hey man, I want to see you." I said, "Yeah, okay, I'll be here, you know." So when the band came off the stage during the break, he said, "You want a gig?" I said, "Huh?" Now I had just gotten back home that day, and hadn't even finished unpacking. And I said, "Where? With who?" He said, "With this band." I said, "With Erskine Hawker's band?" I said, "Well, I'm just home for a couple of weeks, 3 weeks. I'll be going back to school in September." So he said, "Well," he said, "I got to leave the band, man. I'm leaving the band right after they finish this week at the Riviera Theater." He was going back to rejoin a group he had been working with, Ornette Cobb, saxophonist. And he was leaving right after the gig, and they had some one-nighters on the way back to New York. He said, "Well, maybe you can finish out the tour, and when they get back to New York, then they can pick up somebody else in New York." So I said, "Yeah, that sounds great, you know." So he said, "Well, bring your horn and sit in tomorrow." So I said, "Okay." So I got next night I took my horn, sat in with the band, sight read the book, and Erskine was satisfied. So 2 days later, I'm packing my clothes back up to. I had 2 suits then, and packed my clothes, my bag, and left on the bus. Did a string of one-nighters, which included playing in Detroit at the Greystone Ballroom. We played outside in the Greystone Gardens, and then after midnight we moved inside and played the balance of the dance inside the ballroom. And we toured on through Ohio, Pennsylvania, on into New York, and opened at Savoy Ballroom. And opening night, Savoy Ballroom, now I only had one week left before I had to get back to school. So first kid I run into at the Savoy Ballroom was Booty Wood. He said, "Man, guess what? Ornette Cobb got sick again, and I'm out of a gig." I said, "Well, man, you can get your chair back, because I'm leaving at the end of this week, going back to school." So I got a job with the government, civil service, and had a civil service job for about 8 months, maybe not that long. I'll say maybe about 6 months. Then I got a call to come join Count Basie's band. So I said, "Man, this is it, you know." I was sick of the government job anyhow, because it kept me away from my horn too much, you know. But like I make a gig and maybe wouldn't get home till about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. You had to get up at 5 or 6 to make it to my day job, and that kind of wiped me out a lot, you know. So I wanted to play music full time. That's what I've been wanting to do all my life anyhow. So immediately got myself together and caught the train. My brother and I, we both joined the bassist band at the same time. The bassist had just reorganized his big band after having been broken up for about a year and a half. He wanted to go back to using a big band, so he had to get a bunch of new guys because the guys from his previous band were on their own doing other things. Plus, he couldn't afford the salaries that these guys would want. This was in 1951, so here I am back in New York, hey, on Broadway, you know. So he had a bunch of heavyweights in that band, though, like Marshall Royal, Charlie Folks, Clark Terry, and Gus Johnson on drums, Freddie Green, of course, on guitar, Wardell Gray, Paul Quinichette, Lamar Wright Jr. And so our first gig was that we didn't even have a rehearsal. We left the next day to go to Washington, D.C. to play the Howard Theater. And we rehearsed the show, and the 3 or 4 tunes the band would play during the show that morning before the first show. And man, it was such a gas to sit in that band and hear those guys playing that music right off the bat, sight reading and kicking, you know, and swinging. So I said, man, this is it, you know. So we opened on a Friday, and having just been out of school a year, 2 years, or less than 2 years, a lot of my schoolmates were in Washington, D.C. from Wilberforce, and they came by and saw me in the band, so they said, come on, man, let's go and hang between shows, you know. So I said, yeah, that's right. I said, good, because the second show don't start till, I forgot exactly what time, but anyhow, say like second show doesn't start till 4 o'clock. And it's 2 o'clock, you know. So I see, I got a couple hours. Well, I didn't know that they had rescheduled a different time for Saturday's show. So I'm out hanging out, you know, having a taste, having a good time. I said, well, about time to get back to the theater, you know, got a half hour, you know. So we pull alongside the stage door of the Howard Theater, and as soon as we pull out, Count Basie walks out of the stage door. And I said, hey, Bass, how's everything? He just nodded, and all of a sudden I hear the band kicking, you know. They were already on stage. But they were playing one of the acts, so Basie left the stage because he didn't need him to play behind the act. So I had to sneak on, get my horn and sneak on the blackout. And so when Basie came back on stage, she said, I'm going to get rid of that trombone player. And Clark Terry was sitting right behind me. He said, man, you done screwed up, man. Man, Basie don't play that missing shows stuff, man. All the trouble I went to get you in the band, and you kept showing up late. I said, oh, man. First thing ran through my mind, I quit my good government job, blew my regular weekend gig, and I'm going to be out of, I got to go back to St. Louis with my tail between my legs. But he let me slide, Lord. But I was uneasy for a whole week, man. I said, man, I've blown it. I haven't been late for a show since. And so it was a thrilling experience, you know. After we left the Howard Theater, we went the usual southern route through Virginia, the Carolinas, Texas, and New Orleans. on out to the West Coast. And the band was really getting tight. I mean, the band was cooking. And after we finished the Oasis, we did a few days in Stockton, California, Salt Lake City, on into Denver, Colorado, and basically had to break the band up for a couple of months because he had to fulfill some obligations he had made with the small group. And I was thinking, oh man, I hope this is not it, you know. We'd only been out like about 3 months. I don't have no government job no more, you know. So we went back to St. I went back to St. Louis, of course, 110 degree heat, and tried to pick up a few gigs around town. And sure enough, after about 2 months, the band did reorganize, and I hurriedly jumped on the Pennsylvania. You know, trains are still running good during the 50s. I don't know why they ever got rid of trains in the first place. And anyhow, I got back to New York, eagerly waiting to get back with the band. Stayed with the band another 2 years, and we played Birdland. The band was really a hit. I think the bass band actually put Birdland over because Birdland was kind of struggling, even though they had great attractions. It wasn't like a sellout type, only on occasions. So the bass band was the first big band to play in Birdland, and we had remote broadcasts and started packing the place, you know. So they would bring the bass band in for 2 or 3 week stands every time the band would come off the road. Like if we'd go on the road for 2 or 3 months, we'd always know we'd go back to Birdland or the Savoy Ballroom. Then after a while, it started getting so we were spending more time on the road because actually, when you're sitting in a club or a hotel, the band itself doesn't really generate a lot of money because it's more or less a home to stay in, keep the band busy. And so the booking agents started keeping us on the road more so than in New York. So we had to pay our own expenses like hotel rent. So I had an apartment, a small kitchenette apartment in New York. And while you're on the road, you have to keep your rent in New York going, plus you're paying your hotel rent on the road. And we started doing like 400, 500, 600 mile jumps a night for months at a time. And sometimes we wouldn't get to see a hotel for about 3 days, 3 nights, because you had to jump from one city to 500-mile jump. We were doing all this on a chartered bus to another city, leave directly after that concert or dance or whatever, and leave for the next destination. And sometimes when we did get to a place where we could check into a hotel, after the gig was over, by the time you got to your room and got in bed, you couldn't go to sleep because you're so used to sleeping on the bus. Like my brother said, I want to get back on the bus so I can sleep. It was like that, you know. After a while, man, it got so tiring, and I couldn't get a raise. So I'm just out there like for fun, more or less, because I couldn't save any money. And so I just kind of got fed up with the road. It just got worse and worse. So I handed basically my 2 weeks' notice. Maybe finished my last gig with the bass band here in Detroit. And I went to the hotel the next morning to see the band off as they continued on their tour. And you're talking about a lump in my throat. Yeah, a funny feeling, man. I said, oh man, did I do the right thing? Maybe I should have stuck it out a little longer, you know. It was a feeling that it's hard to describe. And there I am all by myself in Detroit. Didn't know but 2 or 3 people, you know. What am I going to do? Not playing my horn, no gigs. And the job the restaurant job, the hours were from 6 in the evening to 4 in the morning, so that cut out my nightlife. I had one night off. And that kind of drove me up against the wall, you know. So I went back to New York and tried to see if I could get my chair back with the basic band, but I couldn't move anybody else. So, so I started working around with different groups around New York. So I sweated out my 802 card for 6 months. And I'd sneak out and go on the road with groups like Willis Jackson, Gator Tail Jackson, who had a rhythm and blues group. He was touring with Ruth Brown, who was a hot rhythm and blues singer, the hottest rhythm and blues singer during that time. And I also did some dates at the Apollo Theater with the Apollo Theater House Band. And I worked some gigs with Arnett Cobb, did a couple of gigs with Dizzy Gillespie, did a recording session with Dizzy Gillespie. But the freelance work in New York, I used to think when the guy would say, man, I said, what you doing, man? He said, well, I'm a freelancer, man. So I found out freelancing meant that you were unemployed. So I said, man, I've had it. I'm going back to Detroit. And so I wrote my uncle and said, man, I'm ready to come back. So he said, okay, come on back. He said, I'll give you, he said, this time I'll let you have more free time, work it so you can have more chance to get involved in music, because it's ever be the only thing that would keep me mentally relaxed, you know. So I came back with the different setup with the restaurant, and Detroit jazz scene was jumping like mad. All the joints was jumping like Klein Showbar, while Yusuf Lateef was holding forth 6 nights a week. And, the Parrot Lounge, Rouge Lounge, Baker's Keyboard Lounge, and many other area bars that had music. And so I was able to get my fill, even though I wasn't playing with anybody. But occasionally I'd pick up a gig or two here and there. And with all the heavy cats around here playing, I said, nobody had a big band, you know. So I said, I think I'll get a rehearsal band together, a big rehearsal band together, just to, you know, just to stay with the music. So I was able to get some arrangements my brother had written for the Basie band, and he sent me the scores. And so I had about, I guess I had about a dozen of his arrangements to start with. And so I have a good friend of mine that was living here that'd been out on the road many times with Bill Eckstein Band and others, was back in Detroit too, and he said, yeah, man, I'll help you get the cats together, because I didn't know too many cats during that time, and most of them didn't know me. So he helped me round up some guys, and we all held our first rehearsal. And I guess out of 16, I guess about 10 or 12 showed up. So we kept trying anyhow, you know, until we started, till the word got out that I had these hip arrangements, you know. Man, there's a cat in town named Jimmy Wilkins I got some charts that are bad, man. Yeah, well, let's go and check it out, you know. So I was able to get more cats to come in and sit in with the rehearsal band, and they were enjoying it. So the band started getting good, you know. I said, man, this band getting too good to not be heard. So we got together and promoted our first dance ourselves at old Prince Hall Lodge on MacDougal and Gratiot. And we hustled tickets, and it turned out pretty good, you know. So then we started doing things like making appearances at the Old World stage that used to be on Woodward and Davison, and we were able to get a gig or two out of that performance. And then we started playing, I talked to the owner of the old El Cino to see if we could get an off night there, playing one night a week, like a Monday night, so the band could be heard. You know, we charged $1 at the door. and we split the door and the bar tab, whatever we made on the bar and whatever we made on the door, split it 50-50. So, no, we were, it was either a Monday night or a Wednesday night. I think it was a Monday night. And so the band, people started hearing about the band, and they enjoyed the band. And then I started doing dance dates for different sororities and fraternities and social clubs. And during the course of building the band, a lot of the guys that came through the band went out and made it on their own and really made a name for themselves, like Curtis Fuller, with that one time was with the band, and Albert Aarons, who ended up playing with the Count Basie band. Other trumpet player, he went to New York. He was doing well for himself until he kind of flipped or something. There's always the trouble replacing those kind of guys, because a lot of the better musicians around town, I would say the more established musicians around town, worked more regular, and they didn't have time to really take off to. I would come up with a gig like once a month or something like that, or once or twice a month. They had their steady gigs going for themselves, and so they couldn't fulfill obligations. I said, I got to get some cats in the band that are not dependent on music for a living, so I can keep the band solid, And so it worked pretty good, and then people started. Some of the guys started making a rep with the band, and they started getting more gigs, and then they cut out, Freddie Waits, a drummer that was out of Mississippi, was a teenager, and his mother used to be a waitress at one of the popular Chinese restaurants. And she said, I want you to hear my son play. So I said, okay, come on by rehearsal. And he was just a teenager. Boy, but could he play? That cat could play, man. Then Motown grabbed him and started. He ended up, he had to spend all this time playing for Motown until he finally left town, went to New York. And he's made quite a name for himself in New York. He's worked with a lot of the jazz greats around New York. He toured with Ella Fitzgerald on occasions. And so I was quite proud of him because he was really a nice kid for a teenager. And usually teenagers are so arrogant and man not right together. But Freddie Waits' man was really together, so I was quite proud of him. And he always tell everybody, hey, I got my start with Jimmy Wilkins' big band, so it makes you feel good, Up until Motown started making the headlines, and all the Motown acts were getting to be big acts. And I did a little bit of recording with the Motown, for some of the Motown acts, but I couldn't devote too much of my time because I was working the post office every day, and I didn't want to blow my good government job. A lot of the sessions were in the daytime, so I only made the sessions that I could make. I had the time to make. So, and meanwhile, a lot of my friends from New York was coming to Detroit as music arrangers and conductors for many of the Motown acts that were really making it out there in the world. And so a good friend of mine, Gil Askey, was writing and conducting for the Diana Ross and the Supremes. And they had several engagements lined up in the Midwestern area. And they needed a big band, so he talked to Motown executives into taking my band on the road to back the Supremes. They weren't extended tours, like most of them were usually 3 or 4 day tours and you're back home. So I was able to take a sick day off the post office or something like that to make some of these shorter gigs around the area. And most of them were at colleges, of course. And a couple of occasions we went out on some long tours. Like one particular tour, we were out for about 19 days, and out of the 19 days we worked 18 of them. So that gave the band a lot of work, you know, taking the tours with the Supremes. And my buddy Clark Terry, meanwhile, had formed a big band to take to Europe, or he had got a chance to take a big band to Europe for a European tour, a 4-week European tour. And he wanted me as one of the members of the band. I was supposed to have been an all-star band. It turned out it was an all-star band, so especially when I joined, of course. Just kidding. Anyhow, I applied for a leave of absence from the post office, and it was almost like being back with the Basie band because of the personnel. And we toured. We opened up and hit Copenhagen, Denmark. Played a couple of dates in the Denmark area, and then we went to the north, the Pori Festival in Finland, which is one of the major European jazz festivals. And it was a sight to behold. It was a beautiful setting, and to see all the people out there, it wasn't like an arena or nothing. Everybody was sitting on lawns or chairs they had brought to sit on, and it was unbelievable to see how. Because this was actually the first major jazz festival I'd ever played, and it was breathtaking, and the scenery was so beautiful, and the reception was so great, and people was just great. And there we went on into onto the European continent. Worked Italy, Germany, West Berlin. I'm trying to think, did we do a date in Paris that time, that tour? No, we didn't play Paris that particular tour. And down into Spain, and back up to Copenhagen. A couple of dates in Sweden. And our final engagement was in Molde, Norway. My brother said, he had been to Europe before on tours. He said, "Hey, Jim, this is one of the better tours," he said, "because some of these European tours are murder." You know? So I got to find that out the second time I went to Europe on a tour with Clark Terry, and that time was one of those real grinding tours that my brother had told me about before, you know, where it was worse than traveling back here in the States, because going through a lot of the European countries, you don't have the freeways, and you going through the mountains all the time, like the Alps and everything, and you're on the bus for like 12 hours at a time. And by the time you get to it, like particularly in France, the restaurants don't open till 7 o'clock. So you get to a town like 5 o'clock or 5:30, got to check in the hotel and get to the hall for a sound check, so you don't get a chance to eat, you know. One particular tour, we went to Wichita, Kansas for the Wichita Jazz Festival and recorded an album live that was nominated for the Grammys. It's called Clark Terry's Big Bad Band at Wichita Festival, Jazz Festival. And it's quite an album. I hadn't listened to it for a couple of years, and I pulled it out recently, and I couldn't believe how great that album is. It's one of those albums where every tune is interesting, and a lot of times you get an album, 8 or 10 tunes, only 4 or 5 of them are interesting, but this particular album was great.